Okay, chapter 12:1 is about squares and square roots. It's probably pretty familiar stuff to you, but we will talk about some of the details for it. Have you ever played Foursquare? It looks like this. Well, if you were playing Foursquare in algebra, you'd have to call it something else. In fact, you would have to call it two square, or more likely, two squared, because if you have 2 times 2, these 2 times these 2, you end up with a square of 4. It's just like doing the area if you were measuring to put carpet into a bedroom or paint a wall or something. 2 squared equals 4. Now, the square root, for instance, of 121 could be 11, or it could be negative 11, right? Because 11 squared equals 121, negative 11 squared also equals 121. However, your book is going to represent using the radical. That's what this little thing is called. It's based on a Latin word, radix, which means root. But the radical of 121, or the square root of 121, they're going to be wanting the positive square root of that. If they wanted you to represent it as the negative square root, they would put a negative sign in front of. So it would be the opposite of the square root of 121, literally, which would be negative 11. So just for the sake and purposes of dealing with your book, you do need to know that. Also, our book does not deal with the square roots of negative numbers. In Algebra 2, you will learn those because they are considered imaginary numbers, but we do not deal with those in Algebra 1, so just breathe a sigh of relief. Okay, and the next thing you need to know is this, is that the square root of 50, the square root of 49, and the square root of 64 are related. Okay, not really at all. But every number, every positive number has 2 square roots. But we'll get bizarro numbers like the square root of 50, which is ordinary enough, actually. But we don't have a nice exact decimal form for the square root of 50. We do for the square root of 49. We know that is 7. We know the square root of 64 is 8. So sometimes in your book, it's going to ask you to figure out what square root the square root of 50 is closest to. Now, in this case, we can see that it comes in between the square root of 49 and the square root of 64, which is 7 and 8. We also can see that the square root of 50 is much closer to the square root of 49 than it is to the square root of 64. And so if you were asked which one it was closest to, you would say 7. Your book on page 563 lists all the squares and square roots from 1 to 100. I want you to memorize the perfect square roots 1 through 25. In other words, 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, all the way through, 11 squared to 25 squared. So I want you to memorize those squares and obviously the square roots, which will be quite simple. But that will help you a lot as we move forward in this chapter. Have some fun.